Magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
That guy, seriously, okay, we're recording this in downtown Tulsa. There's a big window here. You might be able to see him now on the YouTube version. There's a guy walking down the street who has put a lot of effort into his mane. Super thick, super long.
Lush.
It was luscious. I could see the lusciousness from across the street.
I would call it flowing locks. I mean, it's nice. It's got a nice breeze out there today.
Yeah.
You know, you could tell they were properly moisturized.
Maybe that's
what kind of
maybe the
feedback
breeze
would you like to give
I
this
think
guy?
the breeze is why. He prepped for today. He was like, wind coming at 27 miles from the southwest. I'm heading outside today. I'm pulling this thing out of the ponytail. I'm moisturizing.
Yeah.
I'm maybe blow drying it. I
Some
don't know.
guy recording a podcast up in the second floor window.
I'm going to be memorialized forever.
I think you should give him some feedback about that, Luke.
Okay.
Hey, but welcome to Magic in the Room.
Yeah.
I'm Hannah Broderud.
I'm Chris Province.
And I'm Luke Freeman. And today we are talking about feedback. Good job, Hannah, introing that. We are in our series this year around leading a team. You can listen back to our other episodes around just what it means to transition from leading yourself to leading a team, how it's different, how your outcomes and measurables are different. We have talk about trust, talk about communication, conflict, and some other topics. But today, it's all around feedback. There is a downloadable guide for this episode and every other where you can kind of do some reflection and apply some of these concepts to your own leadership challenges at magicintheroom.com. So, feedback. Chris, I want to give you some feedback. That was a little bit of a long segue. I pitched it to you, and it was 3 seconds of silence, it felt like.
Yeah.
I think if you could be a little quicker.
I was thinking about last week when I was at a conference. I received some unsolicited feedback.
How did that land?
I just wanted to tell the guy to stick it in his ear, because I didn't ask. And the thing he was giving me feedback around, I did intentionally.
Yeah.
That is the best. I love that when you're
no, I know what I did. Yeah, exactly.
Here's an even better scenario. I'm going to give you some feedback, Chris. And the way to receive feedback is to just listen and not say anything back. You're not allowed to
rebut,
explain your perspective or why you chose intentionally to do that thing.
Just eat the sandwich you're willing to feed me, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. This is exactly, all of this is exactly why this topic brings up a lot of emotion for me. Mm-hmm. There are things that I'd rather not know. If what you're going to tell me isn't helpful, you might save it. If I've already communicated, it's a blind spot,
Yes,
or
but
I
Chris,
know when I do these things.
I am a source of truth for you. This is why
Hold up that mirror for me, will you?
I'm bestowing on you this feedback.
Well, thank you so much.
Because I know.
Yeah, I'm glad you know better than me.
Best.
Right. I'm glad you know better than me. So that's really the issue, right? Then I think that's the sensitivity of feedback. And then it becomes a question of, okay, how do we navigate it? Because obviously it's something we all need. It's something we respond to, but certainly can be a source of anxiety. It's how do we capture and leverage it properly? Well, let's talk through this. What is feedback?
Yeah. Well, let's be real. Feedback is everything. Whether I notice or not, I'm constantly getting feedback, right? By the way people respond to me, by the way they don't respond to me, through their body language, their facial expressions. through comments that are made, what's said, what's not said, what tone it's said in. Like, everything around us can be a source of feedback. And as intentional leaders, we can notice that. We have choices to make about the things that we notice and actions to take, whether we choose to adjust our behavior or not.
How fast I do something, there's feedback in that. How long it takes me to action something, there's feedback in that. The willingness to do or the willingness to not do. Those are sources of feedback. And I think there's, like any sort of measurement, I think it can be qualitative, it can be quantitative. Because we're constantly outputting, we're also constantly receiving that energy bounce back in some form or some way. Luke, where you shake out, what's feedback to you?
Yeah, so I'm going to throw in a psychological construct here. It's called self-monitoring. So someone's propensity to be a self-monitor basically means, if you're high in self-monitoring, you modulate your own behavior based on the feedback that you're receiving socially pretty widely, right? So you might change your tone of voice or your approach or what you're saying or how you're standing or your body language, whatever, based on social feedback that you're getting. Folks who are low in self-monitoring tend to be more static personality and change less based on their social environment. So I think knowing if you're naturally a high self-monitor or low self-monitor is important. So for me, I'm high at self-monitoring. I adjust quite a bit depending on social setting, group, all of that. It's not a positive or a negative, but knowing that about myself means that I can be intentional in how I accept that feedback and whether I go to my default, which is to mirror, adjust, or whether I intentionally be the person that sticks out a little bit or rocks the boat a little bit or shakes things up socially a little bit. And I should be building the skill to do both, to be able to respond to feedback in the moment really quickly, or to say, no, this is a non-negotiable for me, or my objective is to move the social dynamics here, so I'm going to show up in a certain way. So to me, like this idea of self-monitoring, it's an example of the more we understand the types of feedback we're getting and the options we have on responding to that feedback, the more intentionally we can manage ourselves through the world as a leader.
There's also a component of how I feel about the person who's given me feedback.
Yeah.
And like the importance of relationship in that, and how honest do I know their values to be? What is their moral compass? Are they in it for me? Do I experience them as high empathy? Right? If they're not in it for me, if I do not experience them as a person with high ethical intensity, right, or moral alignment with myself, like I'm just going to toss the feedback.
See,
right, and here's why.
Okay,
and I think Dan and I were talking about this last week. When someone is giving me feedback, especially unsolicited, but even if I ask for it, it is put through a process of compression in their mind, filtering through their values, and projection to my behaviors. When my compression and my projection of what I believed or was valuable in a situation, if I'm intentional, should have showed up in my behaviors. So what someone else, how they process and how they project onto intentional behaviors of mine, I have got to make a real intentional choice about how I value that. Which pieces apply and which pieces don't apply, and listening wholeheartedly, but under no obligation to implement.
So just to say that in a different way, did I hear you right that you're saying feedback says just as much about the person giving the feedback as it does about whatever the behavior of that they're sharing feedback on?
100%.
Yeah. So it's just as much about their values and what they notice as what came from you.
Yeah.
And like I shake out differently on this because I'm always interested in feedback from everyone, even if they're, someone that I don't respect or someone that I am not morally aligned with, just because I want to be able to influence those people too. And so when I get that feedback, it doesn't mean that I'm saying they're right, but I apply it back to myself to say, okay, how could I have said that differently? How could I have positioned myself different? What strategic decision could I have made differently to influence this person to my, objectives, which typically is, right, more fairness and equity for everyone, more, progressive advancement of the organization, right? Whatever that is, right? That's my objective. So to me, I'm like, bring it on, right? So that I can influence you better, even if you're my opponent.
And interesting take on values, because what you try to do is really open your perimeter. You try to have the largest perimeter as possible. My approach is typically to close the perimeter and make that perimeter as tight as possible. So I'm saying I'm going to behave or communicate something explicitly that is intentional so that we both will know if there's alignment very quickly up front. So really, instead of saying I want to cast a wide net, my particular approach is network nodes. Like here's one out of 100 people might align, but that person also influences 10 and they influence 10. So I focus on smaller numbers of connections, but rely on alignment to achieve network effect. So two very different strategies. And again, trying to get to like equifinality. Like there's different ways.
That word again.
Yeah, there's different ways to get there. Right? If you want to influence 100 people and I want to influence 100 people, the feedback we choose to activate, right, can look very different based on the strategies we use.
So what I'm hearing is that feedback can be a tool for influence. So I'm curious, I'd love to hear from each of you. If I say, we need to talk, or I'd like to give you some feedback, or so there's this thing you do. How do you feel?
Well, one, I am trauma informed, and like the worst text I can get is call me. I just need everyone on the team. Like if you text call me, I'm just automatically going to say, what are we going to talk about? Because I'm assuming like somebody just quit. I'm terminally ill. You're terminally ill, or someone just passed away. Right?
It's best to do it at like 11 p.m. and then be like, hey, we can connect tomorrow.
Right. Yeah. Talk to you tomorrow. So anytime there's that hint of like, we need to talk, like, burn it down. Right? Like whatever this is, I don't want any part of it. And that is my initial like trauma informed reaction that then I have to self-monitor and coach myself out of. Right? And I have to get comfortable with whatever the conversation is going to be, which is why I start asking questions.
Yeah. Luke, how about
Well,
you?
if you're trauma informed, I'm shame informed.
Right?
So my go-to is like, what did I miss? What are we doing wrong? What needs to be fixed? What is basically what is not copacetic, and what am I going to need to do to respond to this? And usually it's like, sometimes, sure, I'm like, yeah, this person's probably being dramatic, or they're have a concern that might be flippant. But again, like shame informed, I'll take ownership of all that. I'm like, yeah, I need to communicate differently with them. Somehow I let something slip through the cracks, right? So I just go to, I have the same, like, let's do it now. I don't want to be thinking about this for a day or 2 days or 2 hours. And the whole next meeting that I had scheduled that I'm sitting through, I'm just like, what is it? What's going on? Can we talk? You know, just to try and get the mystery solved.
Yeah. So both of what you described are threat responses. That's how our brain responds under threat. We go into fight, flight, freeze, appease. There's some kind of survival mechanism that kicks in because it's like it's a big red flag. Something's wrong. What's going on, right? And the things that will trigger that are what we call, we've talked about the SCARF model before, right? Those are 5 social needs that we all have. They're status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, or fairness. If any of those are triggered, and they're different, how important each of them is to each of us is different, right? On an individual level, we all need all those 5 things, but I know, Luke, for you, justice orientation, fairness is a really big one. That's a big flag, big trigger, right? For me, autonomy is a big one. Don't tell Chris Province what to do. Autonomy is probably pretty high, right?
Yeah,
and I think
sure.
for all of us, status, that was the one that was kind of surprising to me, what that actually means. It has everything to do with where we see ourselves in relation to others, being seen as competent, being seen as an expert, right? And it has a lot less to do with those kind of external status symbols. It's much more about internal relationally, right? So when we receive messages like that, that could be either a formal, unsolicited feedback or some kind of call to, we need to have a serious conversation, the brain acts in a threat response, right? Because one of those is threatened.
Yeah. Feel all that cortisol just coursing through, you know? So it's, the whole idea about the SCARF model, I think that's important, right? Because the feedback we get lets us know our relatedness. The feedback we get lets us know if we're autonomous. The feedback we get allows us to know if something is just. So kind of monitoring our spot. Like, what is the story we're writing? If every year is a chapter and every day is a page in the book of life, like the feedback we get from going through and like experiencing life, like trudging through the muck, like it will give us feedback on those things. And then if we want to write a different story, if we want to change the trajectory, we act on the feedback. And I think that's the most important idea, is those core needs or the things that are most important, our highest orientations. When we're getting feedback that says you are not properly oriented to the things that are important to you, that's when we action things on a macro level to change the story that we're writing.
Yeah.
And that's where, feedback is a big topic, because you can act on it from a LifeWays standpoint in the chapter or the book I'm writing in my life, or I can apply it at a micro level where you say, Chris, when you do this, it makes me feel this. I was like, thanks for the feedback. I will remember that. I will action that. And that's a micro transaction, right? It's something I can do, check the box. Hey, Hannah communicated to me clearly, like, when I do that, she feels this way. I don't want her to feel that way, so I'm not going to do that anymore. And I think it's just keeping our eyes open to that idea. Like, what is macro and what is micro? What do we want to action and what do we not?
Yeah.
But if we're getting like negative feedback on the macro level in the story of our life, the last thing we should do is ignore it.
Yeah.
I think we need to be accountable to those needs and understand, like, are you high justice orientation? Are you high autonomy? Are you high in relatedness? What are the things that are most important to you? And are you making those things happen? Because the only person that can make those happen is you. And the only way to judge what direction to take them is to read the truth in the story.
Yeah. And I think there's a key, right? And we've been talking about throughout the series about performance development, and often we consider feedback as part of performance development, right? It's about building a relationship with another human being and getting to know that human being. Like, what are the things that are important to them? Also being aware of when I start a conversation with, we need to talk, or I need to give you some feedback, being aware that that's going to trigger some level of threat. And so if we want to be effective in building relationship, in developing performance, we need to understand how we can lower threat or minimize the sense of threat, because it's going to help. It's going to help the relationship and also help the other person really hear what it is that we're saying, right? If they are in full-on threat response, they're probably not going to be hearing us very clearly. And I think that's one of the biggest problems with most feedback, is that it takes skill to do it well if we're going to deliver feedback. Also, receiving feedback well takes skill. And very often, feedback is delivered very poorly, and it is what informs the trauma further, right? So just a quick story, recently an organization we're working with, a person, mid-level manager that we have a relationship working with, recently was given some feedback by their leader. And it was a 12-point bullet list of what that person is doing wrong and how the person reporting to them don't want to work for them anymore because of all these things. And this is an individual who's tries hard, has not had a lot of support, not a lot of performance development. They're prone to action, so they'll take action, but it's often the wrong action. They don't have a lot of clear direction or recognition or support. And by the way, they haven't received any input or recognition, so they're assuming they're doing fine, right? And then the one conversation is, here are all the things that you're doing wrong and why people don't want to work for you. Like, talk about threat response, and talk about, just a very painful experience. And could that have been done differently? Yeah. We could have minimized that threat. Now, this is a person with a growth mindset who is choosing to take the feedback and grow from it, right? But it was a painful experience. And to be able to get to the point where they can even engage with the feedback and take steps to learn and grow from it, there was some unnecessary suffering involved.
Yeah. And I think we run into some problems when feedback is shared just from where it originates. If me giving you feedback is based on me being offended, I've got to really think about that. Because sharing things that are not helpful only erodes our relationship.
Yeah.
You're not going to... I don't know your intent. I can't pretend to understand your intent. So for me to think that you intentionally offended me, it seems to be a little bit of a stretch, right? Like, how many people intentionally offend someone else?
Some, but
okay,
not that many.
And there are times when that can be strategic.
Sure.
Okay. Why do I think I need to communicate every time I'm offended? That's what I'm saying. Is I've got to really think about whose issue this is. Yeah. Am I going to choose to rise above the circumstance and say, you know what, I know at the end of the day we're shooting for the same goal, and any feedback I give in this spot probably isn't helpful? because I don't know how much of it is really on me and how I'm feeling today, or how much is a result of what I experienced this morning as I was trying to get the kids ready for school and, had to turn around 14 times to get lunch and then a backpack. And then we spilled stuff on my daughter's clothes and, Yeah. But I've got this tug at me that says, like, I'm offended right now and I want this pain to go away.
Well, and that's the key, right? When we experience pain, our instinct is to pass that pain on to somebody else. We need to get rid of the pain, and we do that by inflicting or passing on the pain or sharing the pain.
Yeah.
And we often do that unintentionally, right? But I feel uncomfortable or upset or experiencing some kind of pain or discomfort, and therefore I'm going to make you experience pain and discomfort, because then somehow I think that I'm getting rid of mine.
Right. And there we embrace that misery loves company, right? It's the idea. It's really, I don't want to experience pain alone. So if I'm offended and hurt, I might shape my feedback in a way that will inflict pain to you. Yeah. So how do I kind of intervene on myself? Again, like we talked about last episode, do I want to be right or do I want to be effective? And there's probably an effective communication that I can make that isn't some sort of emotional unload to you.
So here's another question. Do people need feedback?
We get it anyway. That's my take.
Yeah, it's really, is it close enough in time and space for people to do pattern recognition? So I do think that is one thing that we can think about as feedback givers. Do I need to decrease the time and space between this person's behavior and the feedback that they get? Because if it's a year from now, they don't get a career opportunity, like they might not ever connect the dots. Mm-mm. So the helpful thing to do is help them connect those dots. If it's you know what, they're getting this feedback all the time, whether they choose to see it or not, like, is it helpful for me to point it out? Right. I think we have to go through that exercise.
So, related question. Does feedback increase engagement?
Can. I mean, again, picking up from where we've been to now apply it. Well, what is a coaching conversation? What is corrective action? Corrective action is a form of feedback. Recognition is a form of feedback. Mm-hmm. So, yes, it can, right? And it can certainly help define the boundaries of what is appropriate or inappropriate for our work team.
Yeah.
And kind of controls it elevates our guiding principles and our values. I think those types of mechanisms can accomplish that. My ability as a coach, my ability to apply people practices, my ability to hold a meeting.
Right. And people have limiting behaviors and need really clear, linear feedback on that or boundaries on their behavior. Like, it is like, yes, it can increase engagement as a downstream consequence of their behaviors changing. Right. So if I'm consistently, putting my foot in my mouth and I need to stop for a second and think, and someone gives me some sort of boundary around that, and then 2 weeks later, all of a sudden I have better relationships and I'm more engaged at work, then yes, it can help engagement.
So it's a little bit of a trick question. And the reason I'm asking it is, so in 9 Lies About Work by Buckingham and Goodall, one of the myths is that people need feedback, and that feedback, because there is a little bit of a misnomer that feedback leads to engagement. You're right, it can, but it's not the feedback itself that increases engagement. What the research shows is that it's attention that increases engagement. And so the quickest way for people to disengage is to ignore them. If I, as a leader, ignore the people that work that are part of this team, work for this organization, they're going to disengage. So ignoring people leads to disengagement. When we give a lot of critical feedback, critical and constructive feedback, whatever we want to call it, it shows some increase in levels of engagement because people are going to be afraid of messing up. They're going to not want to make mistakes. They're going to be on their toes a little bit more. So you'll see a little bit of an improvement because negative feedback, negative attention is also attention, right?
Yeah.
Where we see exponential increases in engagement is when we pay positive attention to what people do well. And that type of attention, which comes in positive feedback, positive recognition,
Right.
positive reinforcement, that is the type of attention that actually leads to higher engagement, according to the research.
Well, and I think that's that whole idea of like strengths versus blind spots and strengths-based development is that with a blind spot, okay, so a piece of feedback that I get regularly,
Too good looking.
besides that, the second most common piece of feedback I get is, well, it feels like it's his way or the highway. Okay. Now that comes from defaulting to action and being a generally passionate person, even if I don't believe whatever it is I'm saying. But if we're sitting in a room that is void of ideas, I'll certainly start throwing stuff out there. And if you don't know me, you will think like, oh man, he really thinks this is where we should go. So how do I action that? What I do is I say, listen, like anytime I'm in a group, I have a tendency to be passionate about thought and the process that we're going through together and understand, like, I don't necessarily believe this is the way we should go. I'm just trying to get something seated to talk about, pull thread on, and ultimately like start getting perspectives to inform an idea. But if the other people in that group are S's and C's, and I'm operating in that DI kind of space, if I don't have another D, that group's done. Like we're going to end up doing whatever it is I throw on the table first, because you got the harmony keepers and the hand holders and the analysts that are like, well, that's logical. And then it turns into that low performance, like there's no friction. So I've got to say it right up front. I've got to give all the permission, which is kind of like me saying, listen, I need your help. This is where I'm going to go ahead and ask for advice. And I'm going to be very aware that this is a habit. So this is my blind spot. I need you to challenge anything that I say because I'm not emotionally tied to any idea. And I don't want us to end up off a cliff.
Yeah. Well, and that's in that scenario, you open the door and you are inviting the feedback, right? What feedback are we going to be more likely to receive well and act on? The feedback that we ask for and invite, or that unsolicited feedback that with someone that maybe we didn't have a strong relationship. Unless we're Luke, then it's like just pile it on. He's the glutton for punishment.
Give it all. Yeah. How can I be perfect if I don't have all the feedback?
Exactly.
Ooh, you know him well.
Well, my coaching tip for you last week was around when you see Luke overreaching for perfection, here's some ways you can help him. So that's Cloverleaf for you.
Did you follow the ways? Or did you just leave me hanging?
No, I got him in my hip pocket.
Okay.
So next time you're like fretting and sitting on the phone for an hour and a half on hold, I want to be like, look, it's okay.
I will say one of my great pleasures in life is when I realize like a client or someone else in life is as much a glutton for punishment as me. And I'm just like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
This is going to be good.
We got one of them, and I
can
have
tell
seen
them
you.
whatever I want, and they are going to try and do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it takes, you know exactly how to push their
Yeah.
buttons and get them to overreach for perfection.
But it's so much about, like, we do have to be able to give feedback. But I want to throw this out there, and I know, like, violating our time orders here, but man, how much is this about how sensitive are we to task-related feedback versus how sensitive are we to relational feedback? Mm-hmm. And does that not have some sort of play in the type of conflict that we have, also playing into our feedback loops?
I think they're related. Yeah. We talked about on our episode about conflict, the difference between task conflict and relationship conflict. And I do think feedback has a similar dynamic, right? Feedback on task. And I think that's, yeah, I mean, let's talk about how do we do feedback well if we want to have a culture where feedback is seen as something positive that helps us grow. Like, how do we do it well? I do think it's important to teach how to give feedback and also how to receive feedback. There's skill to it. There's practice. And part of it is hold the judgment, right? Don't judge the situation or the behavior. And so a helpful model for giving feedback is situation, behavior, impact, and explore. And so the situation is, so Chris, when we're working with this client, the situation is that you're moving ahead quickly on this project. And in this situation, when you are not communicating to your team members, in this case, me, the conversations that are being had with the client at the senior leadership level, the impact that that has on me is that I'm unaware and I'm blind when I show up on property. So I can't be as impactful in my work when I don't have the information of what's already happened. And the explore is like, what can we do differently to close that communication gap so that we're feeling like we're aligned and we're working on the same objective.
Right. And so that, like, real life scenario just kind of ends in me saying, well, you know, Hannah, we've got 9 people on this project, and I think it would be really ineffective or inefficient to just communicate with you what's happening at the top, right? But if you're feeling this way, I would assume that other people on the work team are feeling the same way, because this thing is moving fast and there's a lot of transactions that are having to be done in this phase. So why don't we rally up just that work team in a one-off and just talk about what everyone is transacting on in a given week, so that everyone, when they show up to their relationships, to their partnerships with that enterprise, everyone can operate with a high level of confidence about what else is happening.
Yeah. I think that would be really helpful.
Well, that's what we did.
That's exactly what we did. Like, this conversation happened, and, you know, there's no value judgment. Mm-mm. There's an observation about a behavior that's having an impact. There are reasons for it, and us being able to talk about that is more helpful and to come up with a solution rather than spinning out about it. Right?
Yeah, because Hannah could just be frustrated and she could pass a judgment as like, well, he obviously doesn't care about me. He's not keeping me in the loop. And like, the fact of the matter is like, we're calling plays on the field every day, you know, and tomorrow's play might be different. Like, that's the phase of the turnaround we're in. So, you know, how do we get the team, how do we get the information flowing at the speed of the challenges that we're facing?
Yep.
But if she passes a judgment on me, some sort of ethical or moral judgment at that point, like, it makes our work exceedingly more difficult.
And that is also what can lead to relationship conflict, right? That we talked about in a previous episode.
Yeah.
If we can keep it at the task level and like just do some problem solving and find a solution that helps us create better outcomes for our client partners, for our team, and the way we work together, let's not make it personal.
Yes. And applying this towards corrective action, it makes corrective action conversations a lot easier when we're talking about the observed thing. We're not talking about the person.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the observation of me seeing a director raise his voice to a frontline team member. Like, that is the behavior I want to talk about. I observed this. I don't understand what the intention was, but I know what her reaction was.
And that's the impact, right?
Right.
And the impact is the key here, like being able to recognize the impact that the behavior has, whether it's on an individual or a team.
And this impact is not acceptable, so the behavior can exist. And just, you know, like, I know this isn't the kind of person you are, but we're going to go ahead and document this as a step one. I don't foresee it being an issue. I don't expect to have this conversation again, because this just isn't what we do here. Well, then something else happens, something else disrespectful or not courteous, not an unkind behavior from the same person. Now I already laid the groundwork with the first one I communicated. Like, I know that's not the person they are, right? We just have to address the behavior. And now the second time I'm addressing something similar, it's about, my concern is this is the second time we've had to address a similar behavior, and I hope that this isn't a habit. Right? I'm hoping that these are, you know, a couple one-off scenarios that will not be part of our future. But understand, like, in order for us to have that future and to operate as a healthy community, these are behaviors that can't exist.
Yeah. And by the way, in the next episode, we're going to talk specifically about corrective action and how to do that well.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that
Yeah.
example.
And ultimately, like, so when people say coach up or coach out, right, that's the whole idea, is we're really talking about those behaviors. And, and again, like, corrective action is feedback, recognition is feedback. You know, where am I in life? And I think that's my sing out, right? Like, we're getting it constantly. I hope that I can continue to become better at providing helpful information to courageous leaders that advances their effectiveness. I also hope that that comes in the form of them asking for advice or opening the door. So I never have to wedge in feedback.
Yep. And I think that's maybe a takeaway, final thought from my perspective is, if we want to create this kind of culture where feedback is seen as a tool for growth, for development, where feedback is welcomed, and where we have a growth mindset around feedback, why not start with practicing asking for feedback? And when leaders lead the way, model the way by asking for feedback, it helps to establish that culture, and also actually helps establish higher trust, right? That's a hallmark of trust. It helps to create trust. When I ask for feedback, it instills trust from the people I work with.
Yeah, my closing thoughts right on the same theme. For me, the most helpful things in my personal development have been when I've been courageous enough and disciplined enough to ask for feedback. And I'll just tell a life-changing story real quick. And when I saw someone else and learned from someone else who's doing this.
Oh,
so
thank you, Luke.
You were there. So first weekend in grad school, Psychology of Leadership, Dr. Steinheider. We go that first weekend. I'm all, bright-eyed and what's going on here, And we get to the end of the first weekend and she passes out a survey. And I'm kind of looking around and people are like, what's the survey for? The class just started. And she's like, well, it would kind of be pointless for me to get feedback after the class was over because then I couldn't change anything that actually impacted you. And I was like, my head explodes. I was just like, oh my gosh. At the time I was responsible for a bunch of programming with participants or developing people. And I was just like, duh, yes. And if I take that up a level and apply it to me, I've only got so many years of this life. Kind of like Dr. Steinheider. She's only got so many weekends of this class. She's got to get the feedback early and often. I've only got so many years. I've got to get the feedback early and often if I'm going to maximize this experiment that I'm playing with my life. And so I think, that's my encouragement to everyone is if you've not asked for feedback recently, it should be a habit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Sing us out.
All right. If you want to connect with us, learn more about how to deliver or receive effective feedback or anything else related to performance development or team leadership, connect with us. You can find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com. You can find us on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram. And I just want to remind you, we have a free download companion to this episode and the others in the season. You can find them at magicintheroom.com. Magic in the Room is hosted by Chris Province, Hannah Broadroot, and Luke Freeman. It is produced by Ben West. Social media management is by Emma Holland and Maggie King Robinson. Our theme music is by Evan Grimm. You can find his music on Apple Music. This episode was recorded on location in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Magic in the Room is a production of Purpose and Performance Group. Find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com and previous episodes on Magic in the Room.